This is Dr. Ben Weitz with the Rational Wellness Podcast, bringing you the cutting edge information on health and nutrition from the latest scientific research and by interviewing the top experts in the field. Please subscribe to the Rational Wellness Podcast on iTunes and YouTube, and sign up for my free ebook on my website by going to drweitz.com. Let's get started on your road to better health. Hey, Rational Wellness Podcasters. Thank you for joining me again today. We're here today with James LaValle, who is an internationally recognized clinical pharmacist, board-certified clinical nutritionist, and the author of more than 20 books, including Cracking the Metabolic Code. We're going to talk about some of the trends on fitness and lifestyle, and we're going to ask James to clear up some of the confusion that many of us have about what's the best way to get in shape for the new year and what are the most efficient ways to handle that. So, James, thank you for joining me today.
Great to be on. How you doing?
Good.
Good.
Trying to avoid the smoke here in LA, you know.
Yeah, you guys have got it, right?
It's pretty crazy. Fires jumping from one place to another, and this seems to be a way of life now for California.
Yeah, absolutely. We dealt with that down in Orange County here last month where, you know, it only got a few communities away from where I live. And man, I'll tell you what, man, that fire, man, it starts moving, it'll worry you.
Yeah. Talk about fitness. I don't think you can outrun a fire if it's really going.
Yeah.
So the first question I have for you is, one of the fitness trends today is doing what's called high intensity exercise, often for short periods of time. So I'm sure you've heard of the Tabata program. And, one of the protocols might be, say, to do very high intensity, maybe sprinting on a treadmill or burpees or something like that, where you do like 20 or 30 seconds, maybe a minute, all as high intensity as you can. And then you take 10 seconds or 30 seconds off, and then you repeat it 5 or 8 times or something like that. So the whole routine might be 5 or 10 minutes.
Right.
Is this enough exercise to get somebody in shape?
I don't really think it is. I mean, I know Tabatas real well. I've done high intensity training. I think it's great in terms of you're going to feel pretty good. But if you're talking about a type 2 diabetic or somebody that's really overweight, I mean, the evidence still goes to they got to burn it off over a period of time to affect that cortisol level and their blood sugar level. I think that one of the problems we get into is we start thinking that everybody's got to train one way. That's the other issue. I've just seen it over the years, being involved in kind of the fitness community for the last 35 years, almost 40 years, that we get into these trends. I love Tabatas. I think they're fun. First of all, you got to be able to do them. So there are people that can't do them.
Right.
And so we got to eliminate that. And then there's the fact that maybe for people's different metabolic demands, my football player that I'm doing their nutrient program on may be different than the hockey player and may have different training tools than the baseball player or the gymnast. And so then we get into specificity. But for the average person, I got to tell you, Doc, I mean, we just got to get them moving.
Yeah.
Just start with moving, because that's the biggest problem that we've got is people have way too much of a sedentary lifestyle.
Right. And even just moving at work, even not even exercise, but just getting up and moving around is been shown to have a, beneficial effect, right?
Sure. Absolutely. Well, look at Kelly Starrett, right? I mean, Kelly's out there just talking all over the place about the dangers of sitting. I mean, there's no doubt about it. We all think that we're going to go to the gym for 30 minutes and that's going to be our savior. But the other 23 and a half hours, we're a couch potato. Look, that's not the lifestyle we need to aspire to. We need to move. We need to be active. We got to keep our body in the shape that it needs to be in to be able to take advantage of the fact that we're, going to exercise and train.
Right. Do you like some of these wearable devices that help you track how many steps or how much activity you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that brings awareness is great, right? I mean, if I'm going to make a goal, I can track my goal. I think, when you look at the data on it, people kind of wear out wanting to use them after a while. And if you're talking about, oh, is it accurate for sleep? There's a few of the Aura ring, for example,
Right.
pretty accurate for sleep. I kind
Right.
of like that one.
Right.
But some of the other devices less accurate. So I think, look, if I can do something like tie a ribbon around your finger and make sure it reminds you you need to walk more. But I like tracking. I think that people, as they're trying to develop new habits, it can be invaluable for them.
Right. Since we're talking about wearable devices and your Oura Ring, what do you think about heart rate variability as a factor to track, especially for athletes to measure, overtraining and things like that?
Well, heart rate variability is incredibly important because it's what it does is it's showing that they've lost vagal tone, right? And when you lose heart rate variability, you lose your vagal tone. When you lose vagal tone, for the people that are listening, that's the balance between your fight or flight response or the sympathetic nervous system and the, oh no, it's not a white tiger response, your parasympathetic nervous system.
Right.
And when you lose that balance, what's even more important for the average person, it's not just the athlete, what happens is your blood vessels stay stiff. So now I don't get compensatory relaxation when I need to. Now I end up in a situation where I'm getting dizzy on standing. Maybe in the worst case, I get a POTS syndrome or a postural orthostatic tachycardia. And a lot of that's driven by the nervous system. I mean, I just came back from Life Chiropractic College and taught 2.5 hours there just this weekend. I have a huge respect for management of the nervous system. So I think awareness of heart rate variability, I recommend an app called Inner Balance to a lot of my patients because it's easy for them to do. They can track their heart rate variability, has a big impact. And by the way, if you're sympathetic dominant, you're catabolic. When I'm catabolic, I'm losing muscle. Muscle's the currency for metabolism and aging. Don't lose that lean muscle.
So on heart rate variability, for people who aren't aware of what it means, is you need to have more heart rate variability that signals health, right?
That's exactly right. Meaning that your heart has a little chaos built into it. There's a rhythm between the brain and the heart. So what the nervous system is telling your heart to do, there's a harmony to that. And there's a little bit of inherent variability to it. Now, when that variability shrinks, that actually means that the nervous system is miscommunicating with the heart and the neurovascular network. And there are strong correlations, not just to reduced performance. Look, we use heart rate variability on people. We change their diet and we can see heart rate variability changes just based on what they ate, not just on how they trained the day before, right? So if they ate a food they're allergic to, you see a change in their heart rate variability, right? Because of an inflammatory response. So I think it's really interesting that we become aware that, look, this nervous system, this conduction system that's dictating how our heart rhythm, we just got to realize it's the brain-heart connection. You got to get the two together.
Do you think any of these wearables like the Oura Ring that attempt to measure heart rate variability are helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, if you're going industrial, like a lot of pro teams are using the Omega Wave, that kind of stuff. But if you're not using the Omega Wave, I think some of the wearables can help with heart rate variability. For example, Inner Balance by HeartMath has got a real simple Bluetooth ear clip that you can use. And that's a medical grade device. It's accurate. We get people's blood pressure down using it. We get their anxiety down by using it. So I do think there is value in the kind of portable heart rate variability wearable devices. I'm just not as convinced on sleep for a lot of the devices. Some of the devices are really improving on sleep, and I think the next gen on them are going to be really accurate when they start putting like a Band-Aid wearable under your rib cage, which is measuring kind of that diaphragmatic breath. That's going to be pretty darn accurate.
Okay. So I read that you're not a big fan of sports drinks. Why is that? Don't they help with replenishing electrolytes?
Yeah, I think the typical sport drink that your consumers out there buying is just a bunch of sugar with very little electrolytes,
Right.
And the reality is
You're talking about Gatorade and products like that.
Yeah, it's just it's the cheap common denominator that's out there. That's a problem, guys. I mean, right? Everybody knows that. I hope. But the issue is I think you need protein. I mean, protein with your replacement drink is going to be way more valuable. I think in general, people have under the amount of electrolytes they need anyway. You know, magnesium, potassium depletion is rampant in our culture because nobody eats greens, right? Nobody's eating vegetables.
Right.
So I'm not getting the minerals I need. But I think importantly, I think there's some cool stuff out there. Velocitol, for example, a brand new ingredient in the market. It's a chromium and amylopectin combination. It's actually a bonded particle. And it really helps increase muscle protein synthesis. They even showed it in men and women that it doubled it. So I think where the real interesting insights are going to be are these new kind of metabolic targets like net protein synthesis for people that work out, because I still find people tend to be catabolic.
Now you're talking about something you take after you work out, not necessarily before, like some people take sports drinks before, during, or after.
Sure.
So this product that you're mentioning, I looked it up because I saw it on your website, and it looks like a higher glycemic carbohydrate that causes an insulin surge. Is that right?
Yeah, it's going to have an effect on getting whey protein or pea proteins up on muscle tissue. I mean, once again, when you drink whey protein by itself, it does that, right? I mean, that's
Right.
why whey is always thought to be kind of the Cadillac of recovery. You know, the biggest issue that you have, we start thinking about cortisol and insulin and the regulation of how we're going to manage anabolism or catabolism. So the bottom line is we realize that if you don't take something in within 30 minutes of working out, your cortisol level spikes, creating more inflammatory responses in your body. Whey protein, while having a temporary effect on insulin, also ends up having immunologic regulation properties. So I like either whey or plant proteins. There's some interesting, cool plant proteins where they're adding BCAAs and extra amounts to them. And I think that these interesting trends like velocitol, like phosphatidic acid that upregulates mTOR, I think these are really cool trends for people to start maximizing the time that they're taking in, because I still think people end up in catabolic threshold issues when they train. In general, a lot of people are overtraining.
Yeah. But if this velocitol is basically a higher glycemic carb, couldn't you just take sugar? Wouldn't it have the same effect?
Well, it really doesn't. The amylopectin and the chromium, I mean, they've shown that taking it has specific targets for improving muscle synthesis over just taking in a carb. So they've actually measured it. So this is one of those instances where we're taking science and we're starting to take and structure nutrients so that we can maximize the metabolic effect. So no, you don't get the exact same effect. You don't double your muscle protein synthesis by just taking in the carbs.
So is that because the chromium helps balance the blood sugar effect of the amylopectin?
Yeah, I mean, I think without a doubt, you need 4 molecules of chromium to fire your insulin receptor, right? I mean, so, every time you take in any kind of carbohydrate, having chromium with it's going to be beneficial. But remember, it's a complex. Remember it's like zinc and carnosine. Zinc bonded to carnosine works on ulcers. If you take zinc and carnosine alone, doesn't work on ulcers.
Right.
So it's understanding that there is a complexation that takes place that changes the property of the compound. I think you just got to be wary of that, right?
Right.
The sum is greater than the individual components.
Right. Interesting. I also understand that you feel that many Americans don't eat enough protein. How much protein should we be eating? The average person, the athlete, and what are your favorite sources of protein?
Well, for me, it depends if you're in a building phase or a maintenance phase. I like people being at about, if you're working out, if you're an athlete, I like you being at just about a gram per pound.
Some people say up to 2 grams for weight training athletes and stuff.
Yeah, if you're really pushing hard, the only thing I tell people when they're going up to 2 grams of protein per pound is make sure they're getting enough alkalinity with that. So drinking green drinks, getting the vegetable juices, making sure you're getting the mag and the potassium, because the biggest problem that happens is you start to get a net acid threshold in the urine. And when that acid threshold occurs in the urine, they start to break their bone down. And so they're trying to alkalinize with their bone. So like my starting point with people is a gram. And yeah, well, I push that threshold up to 1.5. There's very few athletes where I need to get them to 2 grams in order to get them to get the lean muscle mass they need. Now, if you're talking about a bodybuilder who specifically is trying to just gain mass in order for the sake of gaining mass, versus an athlete who's trying to gain mass to perform a specific sport, that's why you kind of have that sliding scale of where your protein needs are. And actually what ends up happening is I really think that you have to create a sliding scale for proteins, fats, and carbs. You know, where are you at? What type of athlete are you? What are you training? What are your goals? How insulin resistant are you or not? And then you start to facilitate that. The one thing that I do know is, in general, I mean, I just did an athlete yesterday. The guy was like the 50th pick or something a couple of years back in baseball. I did his diet analysis. He's a 220-pound guy. He's taking in 100 grams of protein a day, but he's got plenty of pasta and plenty of sugar and plenty of starch and potato chips in his diet, right? I mean, that's the reality. Once they become enlightened, then it's different. Hey, I'm eating greens. I'm eating sweet potatoes. I'm getting after it with some legumes or whatever it is they're doing. That's great, but that's not where most people are at. And so their protein intake is typically deficient. And, you know, sarcopenia is the big thing for people over 50, man. Even if they drank a whey protein drink and had some of that steak and malositol in there with it, double that protein for this at the bedtime, right? That's what people need to think about.
Interesting, because, you know, the typical American diet it tends to be a lot of meat, right? And then in the functional medicine and fitness community, we got a big trend towards paleo, and, you know, so
Right.
I'm surprised to hear that you don't think people are eating enough meat, because it seems like, you know, meat is a big factor in
the athlete community. You got a lot of people going paleo, and therefore they're not getting enough fiber in their diet.
Right.
So they're losing their resistant starch. And that's why people with paleo diets have higher circulating endotoxin, right? So in these micro communities, ketogenic diet, really big right now, which is a disaster for an athlete. I mean, I can tell you right now, I work with a bunch of professional teams. I know 6 teams that trashed the ketogenic diet 5 years ago because they just wasted their athlete. There was no glycogen in their muscle, right? So not that it doesn't help fix insulin receptors over a short period of time. We use it in epileptics. We use it in cancer cases. I get it. I understand it. But in the larger population of people still wake up in the morning and eat a bowl of cereal with a banana and fruit, or a bowl of oatmeal. They're not waking up in the morning eating a bison burger. So it's different depending on which segment of the world we're looking at. But for the average person, they're going to eat some kind of big starch in the morning with a Pop-Tart, you know, a Pop-Tart chaser, right? I'm going to have a Pop-Tart chaser with my bowl of oatmeal, lathered up with maple syrup and berries and raisins, right? You know, and then at lunch, what are they going to go for? Hey, they're going to go out and eat, and they're probably going to pick some kind of pasta. That, you know, it's where
or
the
a sandwich or something like that. Yeah,
exactly. And you know, so I think, yes, while Americans consume protein, if you look at the data, insulin surges, sugar and carb intake is at an all-time high, and so is cancer, and so is obesity, and so are autoimmune disorders. And you know what's beautiful is we're finally getting the literature coming out saying that too much sugar, too much starch leads to those conditions. I mean, I wrote a chapter in a book called Diabetes and Cancer, Epidemiologic Links and Molecular Evidence. Great nighttime reading. It puts you right to sleep, right? I mean, but I wrote a chapter in that book. And
I'll get a hold of that.
Yeah, this book was like, 8 years ago we wrote this book, literally detailing the molecular mimicry and messaging that occurred from early insulin resistance all the way through to cancer, and how the cell de-differentiates based on eating too much starch and sugar. It isn't because you ate a little too much bacon. That isn't it. It's sugar and starch. And so that's why I think it's important for people to understand, get in protein, look for heightened. If you're gonna do it, look for some of these more structural and interesting and new ways and novel ways to get it in if you're going to train, because I think you need to create advantages where you can.
Interesting. I was just talking to an athlete who let me know that the latest trend in the NBA, I don't know if this is spreading to the other sports now, is vegetarianism. Apparently, Kyrie Irving went vegetarian, is having a big season. Now some of the other athletes are going vegetarian.
Good. Do that for 6 months. We'll see what happens. Wait till their B12 drops out and they're getting neuropathy. They can't feel the basketball anymore. I mean, it's just silly. I mean, I'm sorry. I can't agree with it. I've been in practice 35 years seeing, at one point, 300 patients a week doing functional medicine. I know what happens when people are vegetarian. They get weaker, they get fatter, and they lose their B12. I mean, and they lose their carnitine, so their muscles just aren't going to hold up.
Yeah, because of that What the Health documentary, we're seeing a big increase in people trying the vegetarian or vegan diet. We're getting those questions in the office a lot.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know. But I got to tell you, if you look at Dr. Hughes' work out of Harvard, he's saying, if you look at the incidence, when all the cultures that are vegetarian have a higher incidence of diabetes. And then also, if you look at vegetarians, higher incidence on neurodegenerative side effects. So there's actually now, we used to just think that being vegetarian was better because of some, people write books like the China syndrome that are absolutely slanted and inaccurate in their portrayal of the data. People, the public just listens and goes, oh, this must be healthy. But now we're getting enough people that are on our side of the fence that are going, now, wait a second. Let's look at this data and see how people really feel, right? And
what was the name of the researcher you just mentioned?
Dr. Hugh out of Harvard.
Oh, okay. Maybe you could send me that reference. I'll put it in the show notes.
Oh, sure. Be glad to.
So it's well known that after age 30, mostly due to sedentary lifestyle, the fact that we're not doing some form of resistance training, muscle mass tends to decline, somewhere around 1% a year.
Right.
Besides regular resistance weight training, what are some of the other factors that can help you reduce the loss of muscle?
Well, when we developed the metabolic code algorithm, so the software platform that, we have in doctors' offices, and we believe that, things like stress hormones really play a key role in catabolic drive in your body. So when your cortisol goes up, you're going to lose lean mass, you're going to get insulin resistant, and your blood vessels are going to get stiff, and you're going to lose bone, right? As cortisol goes up, you lose bone. And so stress and sleep are incredibly important. Digestive health is incredibly important. You have environmental burden. Environmental burden can lead to problems with intoxication. Maybe it could even be chronic infection for that matter, but there's some really basic things that people just don't get right, which is they don't manage their stress. They don't sleep well. They have poor digestion, right? They get leaky gut or get a gut permeability problem because, the chronic stress is upregulating their claudin 2, and claudin 2 is causing their tight junctions to separate. And now all of a sudden proteins are getting through the blood and they're getting all reactive and inflamed and they're not absorbing their nutrients. You wanted me to step it up a little, so I'm giving you a little extra. Right? It's like,
I love it.
Not keep it too simple. So the point being is people start having malabsorption, and not just malabsorption, inflammatory responses, which retard their ability to drive tissue anabolism. And that's why it's important. I'm a big fan. Get the plant-based protein powders in. If you're not intolerant to whey, because I'm getting more and more people that have whey issues. You're not intolerant to whey, use whey or plant. I'm telling you, I'm a fan of this philosophical stuff. I have got nothing to do with the company. I don't own stocks or shares, but I'm telling you, I like it because it's targeting the big areas that we've got. And that's people are getting catabolic left and right in an early age.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out, because I work with some professional sprinters, and, there's a fair amount of gut problems. And I just interviewed Dr. Tommy Moore, who works at Nourish, Balance, Thrive, and they work with a lot of athletes, and he was emphasizing gut problems as well. You see a lot of this, and I know it's a big factor. I think one of the factors is so many of these athletes that I've talked to, they're taking all these commercial pre-workout, post-workout, and most of these
Right.
products, not the products, the professional products that we sell in our offices, but most of these products that they get off the shelf, they're loaded with artificial sweeteners, colors,
Oh, sure.
all sorts of synthetic additives, preservatives, and I think that's one of the problems.
Couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think, and then you've got problems of too high a sugar and the osmolality's off, and it causes their gut. They get a malabsorption issue with the weight of glucose, basically, that they're loading into their belly. The percentage of carb is too high, and it creates a gastritis. I mean, it's known. And I'll go back. People that run a lot trigger their cortisol. Your body thinks you're running from a white tiger. Your nervous system, we've got a primitive nervous system in a modern world. When you run that cortisol really strong, and I've got I work with NBA guys. I work with triathletes. I've got the NFL Hall of Fame Village. I'm putting in the Integrative Medicine Center for that $1 billion complex. We see a lot of people, and I'd say that stress hormones wreck your gut. And runners are probably just primary primers for driving stress hormones in their body. How many people are endurance athletes and have irritable bowel, right?
Right.
It's
Very
so
common. What's your preferred way of monitoring stress hormones like cortisol?
It's interesting. I mean, I like a 5-point urinary cortisol. I don't mind salivary, but there's been some aspect of if they don't get it in the freezer quick enough, or you get an accurate reading. So I like the 5-point urinary catch.
You talking about like the Dutch testing, the dried urine?
I like Dutch, but I mean, I use Physicians Labs out of Boca Raton.
Okay.
That's who I use. But
and is it like a dried urine, or is it?
Yeah, it's a 5-point urine collection. It's a very interesting. They're very accurate. Their lab assessment, the equipment they use, I really like it. I've been very happy with the results. And I don't mind a 4-point salivary. And you know what? You're going to find hair cortisol for total body burden is accurate. So hair cortisol does work. It's in the literature.
Huh, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's used in Europe quite a bit. And then, I wrote, my last book was on lab tests. So I wrote a book called Your Blood Never Lies. So I just dove into a bunch of labs.
Oh, okay.
Really got after it. But then look, don't discount morning serum cortisol. Like, I like getting a morning serum cortisol to understand what's going on, because there's some high correlation to CNS dysfunction in the higher your morning cortisol. But in general, I want to see that diurnal pattern. I want to understand if you've disrupted your diurnal pattern, if you flattened your cortisol curve and started creating immune shifts in your body, that if you're an athlete means overtraining syndrome, right? Mood changes, performance changes, all those things start, immune changes like, I'm going to get colds and flus more frequently, all that stuff we're looking for.
Yeah, and there's actually interesting correlations between a flattened curve and chronic diseases. There's a strong correlation between a worse prognosis with cancer with a flattened cortisol curve.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the most predictive for progression of cardiometabolic disease, cancer progression. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's a big deal.
Yeah. From what I've seen, when you get that first morning cortisol, I think a lot of times the labs will say do it within the first hour or two, but it's my understanding that you really want to get that cortisol measurement within the first 30 minutes if possible.
That's exactly right. The earlier, the better. I mean, that's really important. You can get a waking cortisol too, which is kind of like a little pre-getting up cortisol, which is very interesting. When you look at waking cortisol, is that immediate one that you're talking about. That's super important. Just like heart rate, right? As soon as you wake up, that's important. I mean, we've done a lot of work with cortisol over the last 30 years. I mean, I spend probably half my time lecturing in that space, and people still don't understand just how dramatic it is, because when your cortisol's up, it shuts down testosterone production. It shuts down estradiol production. It shuts down growth hormone. It shuts down neurogenesis. So even budding of new neurons in your brain gets shut down by excessive cortisol. Your progenitor cells don't bud to create granules, which basically branch into new neurons when your cortisol's high. So it's a big problem.
Are there other stress hormones you monitor besides cortisol, or is that the main one?
No, I mean, I mainly, if I look at cortisol and its metabolic breakdown, but I look at epinephrine, norepinephrine, see where they're at. If I'm doing a urinary, look at breakdown of catecholamines. I'll do that as well. It depends on the individual. I mean, I'm not so big anymore on doing like, organic acid urine tests because they're so variable so quickly. You give somebody some B vitamins and you change the test results like within 20 days. So, I'm not as quick to go through those metabolic intermediates as what I did when I first started out, because what I'm really looking for are end targets. Like, what are the end target hormones and neurochemicals that are really in the literature that are showing that there's a chronic shift in this person's capacity?
What about monitoring amino acids, either in the urine or the serum?
Love it. I mean, love it. You got it. You kind of have to, because based on their neurochemical deficits, they could be, they could have low threonate if their neurogenesis is down. They could have, their glycine or their branched chain amino acids could be off. The tryptophan could be off. Tyrosine could be off. All these different kind of, amino acid perturbations can really make for a big difference in how the person's going to perform. But a lot of times that's going on because of malabsorption.
Do you like first morning void or plasma amino acid testing?
I've done both, and I think you've got arguments on both sides of the camp on what people like. I like a first morning urine personally, but I'm not opposed to a serum. I think as long as I'm being consistent and measuring apples to apples, and then measuring physiologic response to what I measured, then I'm satisfied. I just don't want to be all over the place with what I'm measuring.
Yeah, I've been using the NutriVal that includes first morning void amino acids.
Yeah, I know NutriVal.
Yeah. So in terms of eating to fuel workouts, what do you think is the best type of food, meals, macronutrients to eat, say, before you go do weight training or cardio?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think that you gotta get a little bit of blend. I mean, I love when people get some fats in, but I think when all people do is eat fats, it becomes problematic. I like potatoes. I mean, I like potatoes because if you heat them and cool them, you get 20% resistant starch out of them. A lot of people don't realize that when you cook a potato, 20% of it becomes resistant starch. And resistant starch is super important for protecting the microbiome when you train, right? Because you're shunting blood from the gut. You start breaking down the microbiome. So, potatoes are great. Love avocado, love fats. You got to watch. I mean, I'm not big on loading up proteins because they tend to digest slow in the gut. So, if I'm going to do proteins pre-workout, I tend to want people to drink them. I don't have them eat them as much.
So let's say you have an athlete and he's going to go work out at 7 o'clock in the morning.
I'll fast him.
Is that right?
Yeah, most of the time I'll probably fast that athlete at least 3 workouts, and then I'll have them eat immediately after their workout.
Even if they're going to do weight training and do some intense cardio?
Depends on the length of time of the workout. If the workout's 45 minutes or less, I'm going to fast them to get the growth hormone release and get the stem cell production and get the autophagy, taking place from that. If it's more than 45 minutes of a workout, I'm going to fuel them. And if I fuel them, I don't mind eggs. They tend to break down pretty quick. Once again, I love potatoes. Add some avocado to it. You've got a pretty nice balanced meal that you can train off of. If people are worried about, hey, I want to get more grain in, grains take a while to load up.
What if athletes are going to have 2 exercise sessions, one, shortly after the other? You try to have them have some sort of a drink, or?
Absolutely. That's in a case where I'll use something like, Generation UCAN. I mean, Generation UCAN is a long glucose chain that releases over time. I'm going to use that powder on them. I mean, I've got great success and a lot of teams on it. It was developed for glycogen storage disease. So it's fantastic in terms of slow release of glucose. And most of the time, look, once again, you've got athletes, like I competed I qualified for the nationals in bodybuilding back in 1983. I was that guy that was eating food and taking buckets of food with me between training sessions. All that stuff is great. Most people don't do it. You got to have a certain commitment. What I would call the commitment's called OCD.
Right.
That you're going to be, just driven to that level. For the average person, I'm going to tell them, find a branch chain complex, get a drink, add some UCAN to it, drink it between your sessions about 30 minutes before your session so you'll be fueled appropriately. And I've had great success with everything from pro athletes to high school athletes doing it that way.
Yeah, I know where you're coming from. I did the same thing. I won the Mr. LA in 1985. I went to the Mr. USA competition in 1989. I won the Natural International. So I did the whole bodybuilding thing. So I know what it's like to
exactly
super obsessive and extreme. And
we're just trying to help people be fit, right? We got to get that average person that's going to do a weekend event, or they're going to, they're trying to train every day and hopefully in a healthy way, about an hour, a day or less. What do you do to stay fit and maximize your gains, right? And then I've got my athletes, my son. I mean, son trains 3.5 hours a day. He just committed to ASU, and it takes a lot more to manage him, and he isn't going to sit and eat 6 meals a day.
What sport is he in?
Middle linebacker. He's a football player.
Okay.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that.
Played here at Mission Viejo. Yeah, it's kind of like a linebacker in the state.
Great.
Yeah, good stuff.
So how about right after your workout? Do you think there's what do you think about the importance of the glycogen window, that they get a certain amount of carbohydrates? Do you think that's really relevant? And then, what should the post-workout meal?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, John Ivey's work, when he wrote the book Nutrient Timing, it was kind of like the bellwether for this whole space, right? And I know John. I mean, I've talked with him. I've sat on boards with him. He's really committed because of his University of Texas lab, where he took thousands of athletes and put them through and measured what was going on. That, feed them within 30 minutes. It makes a big difference on tissue anabolism. And once again, there's athletes that are able. My son cannot eat after he works out. He's too jacked up. I mean, he's trained hard. His nervous system's running hard. I can get him to drink something. I can't get him to eat something right away. So what I try to do is get him to eat or to drink something. I go for a 2-to-1 ratio of carbs to protein, not the 4-to-1. Ivy did a lot of research on the 18-year-old that they would say 4-to-1. So what do? We started telling 30 and 40-year-olds to do a 4-to-1. What happened then? They got fat. Right?
Right.
So it's like I'm pretty. I get the 2-to-1 or 1-to-1 carb to protein ratio. I think that's good. I love it when it's pre-digested protein, so either dipeptides or individual peptides. I think that makes sense. And I think the evidence is strong enough that I'd support it. And once again, it depends on your goal. If I got a fat person training and they're wanting to lose weight, I'm probably going to make them wait 30 minutes, increase that fatty acid synthesis. The different animal than an athlete.
So for the athlete, is that the time where you want some high glycemic carbs?
Well, that's like I said, that's the amylopectin in the chromium. Right? That's the whole purpose of velocitol added into whey protein or plant protein. Yeah, you're going to have a little higher glycemic carb. Glucose is good then. Nothing wrong with glucose then. But I don't want fruit juice, because fruit juice won't actually create the right effect, right? You're going to end up with more insulin and less glucose loading, and that's going to be a problem because you get a delayed response from fructose versus using glucose.
Right. Or even worse, these drinks that have high fructose corn syrup.
Oh, that's ugly. That's ugly, man. You need to go out and say that on the air, man. That's bad. That's really bad.
Good, Jim. So I think that's all the questions. I think you gave us some interesting information to think about. I appreciate you joining us today. For listeners who'd like to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Well, I mean, obviously there's Twitter at Jim LaValle. They can go to jimlavalle.com. So my website's kind of got my stuff. They can get a hold of me there through a variety of ways. There's a messaging capacity. Those are the 2 easy ways. I wish I could tell you my clinic down here in Southern California. I really don't have a website, and I don't even have a sign on my door because I'm kind of busy as it is. So I'm not out advertising.
Well, that's great. What about your books? Are they all available on Amazon?
They are available on Amazon. Yeah, and I appreciate you putting a plug in for them. And I've got a couple new ones coming out this next year and a half.
A couple of new ones. Wow.
Yeah, it's the way I roll, man. I can't help. I got a little bit of dyslexia, dysfunctional thing going on. So
I'm impressed because I'm working on an anti-aging book and it's coming kind of slow. So coming out with 20 books, boy, wow.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get my second one out.
Well, you'll get there, right? Just keep plugging away.
Okay. Thanks, Jim.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it.